Delighted to be here. Well, I've chosen to talk about Ophelia down through the ages. It's really the story about the play of Hamlet in terms of Hamlet's relationship to Ophelia, just as a sample of sort of stage and performance history, but also interpretive history. That is, what problems have come up in the play that, especially relating to Ophelia, that people have concentrated on. How have they changed? What has been the changing course of history of this remarkable play, and especially this troubled love relationship? The play, of course, was performed about 1600, 1601 at the Globe Theatre in London, across the river. The playhouse was newly up at that point, and it was a great success and very often performed. We don't know much about the original performance, except that Richard Burbage clearly played Hamlet. That's testified to. In fact, there's record after Burbage himself had died. Someone wrote, "Often I've seen him leap into the grave," meaning into Ophelia's grave. And that's an interesting problem in terms of staging in the Globe Theatre, because it must have been the trap door. And the point at which Hamlet leaps into the grave, presumably Ophelia's in there. So, and then he grapples with Laertes, who also jumps into the grave. So nobody's ever really been able to figure that out, how they managed in that space to have room for them all, and also for the audience to be able to see what's going on. Chances are that the boy playing Ophelia, of course it was a boy actor, crawled away under the space after having been interred, and Hamlet and Laertes could crawl back out of the stage and grapple with each other on the brink of it. But that's one of the few instances where we have some insight in how it was performed. Burbage, we know, performed the role very often. Burbage was Shakespeare's leading actor, and with a remarkable stability in this company. Burbage and his family were the head of the company that was formed in 1594, called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. It quickly became the premier company in London, the great rival for the Admiral's Men. Edward Allen was the leading actor there. Burbage was his opposite, but his father, James Burbage, had built a place called the Theatre in the 1570s, north of London's walls. It was the first standing theatrical building in London. So the family of the Burbages had a kind of a dynasty, and other members were also in the company. The Burbages, in fact, own 5 of the 10 shares that were owned by actor members. Shakespeare managed to buy one. We were talking about that earlier this afternoon, wherever he got the money. Perhaps he brought to the company the plays that he'd already written, were his stock in trade for paying for the fee to become an owning sharer. But the result was very good. He became quite well-to-do as a result of this, became a gentleman. We don't know who played his Ophelia, but it was a boy actor. There was, of course, a boy actor also playing Gertrude. They had to have several boys who were essentially apprenticed and who had to be put in line so that one would ripen behind the next, since you'd have to have a pretty good set of 2 boys to be able to do Ophelia and Gertrude in this play. And there's some plays, of course, that call for 3 or 4 more or less competent actresses, and that is boy actors. And then their voice would change at the age of 15 or so, a little later than that because of problems with poor nutrition. 15 or 16 they could actually reach before their voices would change. Then they would be rusticated and might well then mature later on into adult actors, either with the acting company they were in or in other companies. There's very good records of that sort. So the boy actors were a very important part of the scene. The other members of the company more or less equally shifted parts among themselves. The tradition is in Hamlet that Shakespeare himself played the ghost. If so, he played a not really totally major role, right? He was a member of the company, but there's also a tradition he played kings in other plays. This is a little unreliable. We don't really know what parts he played, except he played old Adam in As You Like It, seemingly. But about Ophelia, we don't really know how it would have been staffed. About the role itself and about the way the play developed, I'll go back for just a moment to Hamlet's sources. This is going back, of course, to Saxo Grammaticus and the history of the Danes in the 13th century, a pagan tale of revenge that Shakespeare was familiar with, and that also had gone through various versions between the 13th century and the time it got to him, including an anonymous play about Hamlet about 1590. This disappeared. We don't really know what was in it. To compare with Hamlet's version of Ophelia with what happens in Shakespeare's play is to catch one glimpse of how inventive Shakespeare seems to have been, although we don't know exactly what might have come to him from the early Hamlet, for example. But in the original story, there is a character called Hamlet, the protagonist. He has an uncle named Fang, who is a thorough skulking villain who does kill his brother, Hamlet's father. He doesn't do so secretly. It's widely known. Young Hamlet has every reason to know, and as do others. Hamlet hits on the device of using madness as a cover to outwit his canny Uncle Fang. And the uncle, to confront this difficulty, hired and essentially employs the services of a young woman. She's instructed to seduce Hamlet on the theory that if he makes love to her, he must be sane. I love the idea about love relationship. And Hamlet understands what's going on, so he takes the young lady, whom he's known before, and spirits her off to a cave where they can't be observed, and they make delicious love together and laugh at the fact that they're outwitting Hamlet's uncle. That's pretty much the end of the story as far as the prototype of Ophelia is concerned. And it's remarkable, isn't it, how different it is from Shakespeare's version. This young woman, it's a revenge story, first of all. There's no pretense of its being overlaid with a Christian part of the play. It's all about revenge according to a revenge ethic, and it's perfectly okay for the protagonist to take revenge in a violent way. He does so, in fact, comes to terms with his mother after berating her for her infidelity to her husband's memory. They team up, and with her help, they devise a fine web sort of net, which they throw over the castle while Kang and his accomplices are all getting riotously drunk, and then they set fire to the castle and burn them all to death, and that's pretty much the end of the story. So you can see it's pretty much a simplified story of revenge. There's no pretense of some sort of Christian ethic complicating the story in the play of Hamlet. This is about revenge, and that's pretty much true about the love relationship too, such as it is. It's an interesting little sidelight story about amorous relationship. What's so different from Shakespeare, of course, is that their love-making is completely above board and candid and sensual, and they have no shame about the fact that it's non-marital, and they have a torchy affair for a brief, and then that part of the story goes away. So by the time Shakespeare gets around to telling it, he's done a very different thing indeed, hasn't he? Ophelia is introduced to us with her brother, Laertes, and her father, both of whom are deeply concerned about her possible loss of virginity. They're both their advice to her. The man in her family, the mother is gone. We assume that she's dead. Their advice as males concerned about her welfare and about their own reputations is that if she gives her virginity to Hamlet, her market value will decline to absolute zero. That she will no longer be a part of the market. Now that's very consistent with what we know about the court of Elizabeth at the end of the 16th century when this play was written, isn't it? That Elizabeth was very uptight about young women, her ladies in waiting and so on, marrying without her consent or having relationships. And she fiercely defended at least the tradition that she was the virgin queen. Now that's been much debated of late by historians. Is there any evidence that she had a love relationship with Robert Dudley, who became the Earl of Leicester and her chief advisor in her early years, indeed down until 1587 when he died? There's really not very much evidence that that did happen, although there is evidence that they were very seriously interested. That's interesting. Shakespeare's play is written toward the end of Elizabeth's reign, and it contains a story which is rather like that of Elizabeth having been very much in love with a person whom she could not marry for political reasons, and went on to defend her right as Virgin Queen and playing that card off against her courtiers and against wooers from abroad and so on. That would have made a nice sort of political